What are your thoughts about the situation about US policy at the moment?
What I wrote in that article was not just about keeping peace, but keeping us away from the nuclear precipice. And I referred to what many people listening will know, the doomsday clock. The doomsday clock is the notional idea of measuring how close we are to nuclear annihilation. It was started by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists in 1947 to alert the world that in the new atomic age, of course, now we're in the thermonuclear age, we are capable of suicidal destruction of the planet in a way that wasn't true before 1945. And in 1947, these scientists and analysts of the global scene said we were 7 minutes till midnight, meaning that we were at the brink of nuclear war and nuclear annihilation. And of course, the idea was to keep us away from the brink. So what I looked at in that article was which presidents took us closer to midnight and which took us away from midnight. And it was very sobering to look at the clock from the American political point of view. Most American presidents have been failures, in my view, in foreign policy. Most have made the world more dangerous, not less dangerous. Most, of course, have presided over CIA campaigns to overthrow governments around the world. There have been perhaps 90 such regime change operations since 1947. They continue until this day. The U.S. foreign policy is based first and foremost on the principle, if you don't like your opponent, overthrow it, which is a very strange kind of diplomacy. Most diplomacy is if you don't like your opponent, find out a way to live together, actually have diplomacy. Even compromise, a word that's a completely dirty word in our lexicon. It became, quote, appeasement. It became one model, which is compromise means death. This is the psychology. So never compromise, never agree with an adversary, only defeat or overthrow an adversary. This is what most presidents have done. We have had a few skilled presidents. And Eisenhower was one of them, although it's a complicated record because he was a fiscal conservative. He didn't want to spend a lot of money, so he thought literally you get a lot of bang for the buck with nuclear weapons. So he was part of the arms race, but he also understood that there needed to be an agreement with the Soviet Union. President Kennedy saved the world after almost stumbling into nuclear annihilation in 1961 in the Bay of Pigs, CIA operation to overthrow the Cuban government. And then in 1962, the disaster on both sides of the Cuban Missile Crisis when the Soviet Union put in offensive nuclear weapons into Cuba, and we came the closest we've ever come to nuclear annihilation. But then Kennedy and his counterpart, Nikita Khrushchev, were smart enough, human enough, decent enough, thoughtful enough, rational enough to pull us back from the brink and actually enter into what then became for years and even decades a nuclear arms control framework, starting with the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1963. Johnson put us closer to midnight again. Then Nixon, much reviled by me, by the way, in my youth, and by much of society, and of course forced to resign over Watergate, took us away from midnight through so-called détente in the early 1970s and his opening to China. And that was very clever. Jimmy Carter, who I liked as a president, contrary to much foreign policy, actually took us back towards midnight, to my chagrin, because we all learned decades after the fact and directly from the strategic author, or the tactical author of this blunder, Zbigniew Brzezinski, was very proud of having assigned the CIA to run jihadists in Afghanistan, starting in 1979, with the idea of entrapping the Soviet Union in an Afghan invasion. So we created what became Al-Qaeda, what became the jihadist terrorism. This was a CIA op. Yes, it entrapped the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. It entrapped Afghanistan in what became more than 4 decades of U.S. completely created disaster. And it took the world back towards midnight. So Carter failed. The apogee of safety was Reagan and George Bush 1, because this was the end of the Cold War. We thought, didn't we? And this also, of course, was due to somebody who has a very mixed opinion. There's a very mixed opinion about him. I knew him. I actually worked for his economic team. I'm speaking of Mikhail Gorbachev. One thing I can tell you for certain is that Mikhail Gorbachev was a man of peace, which is absolutely remarkable. And unilaterally, he disbanded the Soviet military machine in Central and Eastern Europe, the so-called Warsaw Pact Alliance. And to their credit, both Reagan and Bush Sr. cooperated with Gorbachev relatively straightforwardly. And by the end of Bush Sr., we were 17 minutes from midnight. That means the farthest from nuclear war ever. But a funny thing happened on the way to peace, and that is the point of today, which is the U.S. could not take yes for an answer. We could not accept the idea of peaceful, mutually respectful, transparent cooperation with Russia. We just couldn't accept it. And by the way, what is fascinating looking back, it wasn't even about communism, which was the great bogeyman of the age. It was about Russia. Because as communism ended, as the Soviet Union ended, now we know, and this I think is the main point for our day, we know that as early as 1992, the goal, as expressed by then Defense Secretary Richard Cheney, who became perhaps the most influential single architect of American foreign policy for the next 20 years, was not only to end the Soviet threat or the communist threat, but to dismember Russia as well. Cheney's argument in 1992 was, well, the Soviet Union dissolved. Let's do the same with Russia. Russia can dissolve. And a very insightful way to understand this remarkably dangerous, bizarre, irresponsible, reckless idea is an article by Zbigniew Brzezinski, one of the architects of all of this period, in 1997, in an essay in Foreign Affairs magazine called A Strategy for Eurasia. And Brzezinski just casually notes, maybe we need 3 Russias in a loose confederation, maybe a European Russia, maybe a Siberian Russia, maybe a Far East Russia. Together, yes, but in a loose confederation. The point of reading this is to think about the arrogance, the hubris of American foreign policy, that it's going to dismember Russia. And that, I believe, has been the more than 30-year campaign. Dismember, surround, regime change operation, you name it. But we've got Russia on the ropes. The Soviet Union went down because we defeated it, not because of Gorbachev, not because of peace, not because of making a cooperative offering, but because we are the unipolar power of the world. No one comes close. The greatest colossus in world history, greater than the Roman Empire. This is how American leaders thought back in the 1990s. We have a president who lives today in the 1990s, Biden. This is his formation. It may be his current mental apparatus for all I know, but it is his phraseology till today, the indispensable country, the sole superpower, the country that the whole world turns to for leadership. And the idea was from the start, weaken, dismember, overthrow Russia. We are the sole superpower. So that's where NATO enlargement came in. That's where the U.S. support for jihadists around Russia's boundaries, whether in Chechnya or in the former Yugoslavia, came in, breaking apart Serbia in 1999 with the deliberate attempt to weaken a Russian ally, as well as to implant a NATO base in a, quote, new country, Kosovo. Oh, you're not supposed to change the map. The United States changed the map to have a NATO military base in Bondesteel and to break apart Serbia. 2002, withdraw from the ABM treaty unilaterally, the anti-ballistic missile treaty, put in Aegis missile systems in Poland and Romania starting in 2010, and of course, expand NATO to surround Russia in the Black Sea. Another Brzezinski project spelled out in 1997, stealing, as we've discussed in the past, from Lord Palmerston's ideas of the 1850s. Some ideas, some horrible ideas never die, and this one was brought back to life. But the point, Alexander, is that the presidents from Clinton onward, every single one, Clinton, Bush Jr., Obama, Trump, and Biden, every single one has moved us closer to midnight in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists Doomsday Clock. And we are now 90 seconds to midnight. Are you kidding? 90, they're trying to tell us something, and it's true. And if you don't hear it from the Doomsday Clock, just listen to any stupid European politician these days, because one is more stupid than the next. Let's taunt Russia. Let's provoke Russia. Of course, let's bomb Russia. Let's destroy Russia, says the big Baltic state presidents that want to bring us to nuclear disaster. One after the other makes no rational sense at all. Biden is adrift. He can't lead. So we are, as I have been thinking, with a stuck rudder heading towards the precipice, heading towards midnight, if you will, in the Doomsday Clock metaphor. And every day is bringing us closer, because we have a three-front conflict right now, not one of which is being tamped down. We have Ukraine, we have the Middle East, and it's not only Israel's crazed and genocidal assault in Gaza. It's Israel's continuing attacks on Iran to bring the United States into a war with Iran. Good idea, Israel. Now we need hear today, even from the New York Times, no less, it's Israel's fake bot campaign on social media to continue to influence U.S. Congress. We don't even need to know about the fake social accounts, because the Israel lobby is powerful enough that it has held Congress in its thrall all this period. And we have the third front in Asia. As if it isn't enough, we are absolutely talking every day now. We have politicians, these are grown-ups, at least in appearance and by birth date, talking about war with China. So this is a kind of collective insanity. And incidentally, I had an interview with Tucker Carlson recently, and it generates a lot of viewers and a lot of mail. And I got one just before we started from Germany saying, Professor Sachs, I enjoyed your interview, but you expressed a little bit of puzzlement about what is Germany doing and why is it so self-destructive and so forth. And then it went into a very intelligent discussion about how Germany and every country where this gentleman has worked in academia is completely under the U.S. mystique and U.S. thrall and U.S. influence peddling and U.S. money and military industrial complex. So he says completely impossible in the continental European context to say anything in academia that is against the United States. I don't have that direct sense, but it's shocking because I always thought, and again, I'm a naive guy, it takes me a long time to understand these things, but I thought Europe's the sophisticated one. 2,000 years of history. Europe's got the diplomacy. Europe's seen everything. It's done everything. It understands everything. But what I'm hearing from a lot of people is that there's no real debate anywhere in continental Europe right now. And we know in Britain, I always say Britain taught America everything it knows about all of this, all of this danger and saber rattling and wars of choice. And here we are. So 5 presidents in a row carrying us closer to nuclear annihilation than ever, and an American political system utterly and completely incapable of addressing this right now. Elections don't matter in November. This is something beyond the elections. This is something about the mentality, about the scale of the military-industrial complex, about the depth of these long-term projects, about the special role of the CIA in American society, because almost surely the most powerful institution in the land and the least known and least understood by design. And interestingly, just one last point of the rant, and sorry to carry on, but when there's a real negotiation in the Middle East, when you really need to sit down to talk with Hamas, who goes from the United States? Not Blinken, but Burns, the CIA director. This is not an incidental point. What the hell is the CIA director doing negotiating this arrangement? The CIA is supposed to be an intelligence agency. Of course, we know it's a secret army, but it's amazing to see that. CIA director should not be the negotiator. But the CIA director is the negotiator because that's the real power in the American system right now.